All right, this is a quick overview of a very simple analyzer setup and run inside of STK. Just a really brief overview of what we're looking at in the STK scenario itself. Just have one satellite modeled. This is a geostationary satellite. I zoom out a little bit more here. You'll be able to see that this is just a geostationary orbit that's been designed inside of STK. The satellite itself has a payload, a communications payload. This is just an STK transmitter object. You can see it here. I'm going to turn the graphics on so that we can see that. I've just visualized the antenna gain volume just for example. And you'll see that that transmitter is nested or is a child of a sensor, and that sensor is pointed to a ground point of interest that we have called centroid. Centroid is also where we are co-locating a complementary receiver object in STK. So this creates my point-to-point communication link, and I am then able to perform link budget parameters and analyses between that transmitter and receiver object. So if I were interested in carrier to noise ratio or received signal power, things of that nature, that computation makes that available for me. Now, in addition, you'll see this sort of heat map over the United States area target that we have outlined in red. This is just a continental US area target, and I'm using that as a coverage definition object inside of STK, which means that I just have repeated this centroid place object with its receiver. I've repeated that at some interval across this entire area of interest. That gives me my, my grid definition, and then I calculate a simulated communication link to each one of those grid point locations and let STK know that I'm interested in some metric, and I'm coloring it based on a range of values. In this case, my metric is EB over N naught. And I'm in particular looking at just the average EB over N naught over some period of time. There's not a whole lot of dynamic nature to this scenario because it is a geostationary satellite, but its motion will perturb and drift slightly. So we look at a beginning and ending start time that instantiates and sort of bookends our scenario analysis time period. And then over that time period, what I've chosen to color and focus on for my metric is the average EB over N naught. So that's why there's an average there. All right, so pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of complexity going on in how I have this set up, and that's by design, just to show you the simplicity of Analyzer. When you have an Analyzer installed, you can go to Analysis and launch Analyzer here. There's also, of course, a toolbar option for all of those same capabilities. But I'm going to open up Analyzer really quick, and I'm going to show you what you do in order to get those particular analyses set up and ran so that I can conduct a trade study. All right, so with Analyzer open, and it's sort of remembering my, my variables that I've chosen previously when I was experimenting with this, but you'll see an input of almost an exact replica of your STK object browser. There's a few additional things in here, and those are going to be useful in just a moment, but in general it exposes some of my computations. It also exposes some properties and values about certain things. So for example, here's that centroid object, and I have a position, and that position has properties such as latitude and longitude. I select those and I bring those into this list. Just like click the blue arrow, it brings it over, and I now will have access to use or move, change values of latitude and longitude. And what I'm looking for is a resulting output, and my output is actually part of my my figure of merit, that EB over N naught average value that I'm computing over that entire coverage region. And I can go in and look at the overall value average, and I can bring that over into my outputs. Well, effectively what I want to do is set up a trade study that allows me to give upper and lower limits on where I'd like to move latitude and longitude for this centroid location. So where across that, kind of continental US region, I want to move it around, and what I want to look at as a result is, what is my overall average across the entire continental US? What is my overall average EB over N naught as a result? So now that I have identified my input variables and the output of interest, I can start setting up a trade study. There are a couple of options here you'll see in the menu. So I can do a parametric study that's kind of a single value and a single result. That one's pretty basic. Because I have latitude and longitude, I have multiple variables. I'm going to choose carpet plot, and this is going to be perfect for me to go in and say, you know what, I want to use my latitude and I want to use my longitude, and I want to give some upper and lower bounds. So I may take my latitude from 33 to, let's say, 38, and maybe I want to put 6 steps in between there, right? So it's just going to vary by 1 degree incrementally. Maybe I'll go -88 to -93. Let's change that as well. 6 steps. So this gives me a trade space of sort of a 6x6 run. And of course I want to bring my resulting overall average value of EB over N naught for my giant coverage definition in as my response. Now I'm going to slightly move this out of the way so that we can visualize and watch this sort of running in real time here. So let me pick a spot where it might look okay, and I'm just going to click the run button. And what you'll notice is I get a table of values here in my Data Explorer, and what you'll notice is this latitude and longitude for my centroid, it's incrementally and automatically moving across my coverage area of interest. And it's going to do this throughout all combinations of those ranges that I set up. And it's going to then store the resulting average value. So you'll see that table starting to be built out here along the bottom. And we'll just let this continue to run. Okay, now that has finished, one of the kind of cool things, I guess, that you can do inside of Analyzer is, I can save this table of my results, and I can analyze those in unique ways. I have different charts and graphs and ways that I can look at this. And this saves as a specific file type, and it can just sort of be there for posterity for you as an engineer design team to go back and look at different design cases that you had considered. So I've already saved one of these. I want to open it up as a result, just so that we can look at one of the previous ones. I did a much bigger trade design. Okay, so here's a previous study. It's that same scenario. You can see all of my position, latitude, longitude positions, and that same average value. But instead, I had varied this with quite a number of parameters. I went up to like 100 different combinations of runs. And what Analyzer allows you to do is look at those results in a number of different ways. So you can see some of these Data Explorer products. Some of these are things like carpet plotting some of the variables, and you're looking for trends in the data, right? And sensitivity analysis of, is it latitude or longitude that makes the most impact in my results, right? And I can look at, this is another example. This is a contour plot. Here's one, a 3D scatter plot. And some of these are also interactive, right? So I can zoom in and look at different data sets or data points along that entire trade study. And each of these also constitutes a run, right? So I can see that design point was design point number 63 in my table. I can explore this. I can actually select that current point and push it or publish it back into my STK scenario to do any additional analyses and things that I may be interested in looking at or exploring. So a lot of these design result tools for looking at this, just sort of from a statistical analyses standpoint, these are incredibly useful. And all of this comes as part of STK Analyzer. That's been a native part of STK's automated trade study design capability for quite a long time, and is actually just a subset of a much larger trade study and automation orchestration tool from Ansys called ModelCenter. And we can take a look at this exact same setup and how you would do that or approach that inside of ModelCenter. All right, so now let's take a look at that same process, but this time we're going to repeat it, but we're going to do it completely from ModelCenter. Now, we mentioned previously that Analyzer was sort of a subset of ModelCenter, and the biggest difference is Analyzer is really just confined to the parameters of your STK objects, whereas ModelCenter opens up your ability to not only use applications like STK, but a lot of other modeling and simulation tools that offer out-of-the-box plugins directly to ModelCenter, as well as just opening up the aperture a little bit by allowing you to bring in your own programs and scripts and do a lot of really flexible things. So you'll notice along the bottom here some of these components that I can drop into my design space, and I'll show you that in just a moment. You'll see STK there, but you see a lot of other popular tools, and some of the generic ones like this quick wrap, which just lets you point to maybe a proprietary DLL, for example, and you instantiate the inputs and outputs from that. It's almost like having a little hidden black box. You may have something simple like an Excel sheet that has design parameters in certain cells in the Excel sheet and maybe some resulting cost figures, and you want to include a costing type of analysis to some of your design trade space trade studies. So you can do a lot of things inside of ModelCenter that maybe you didn't have that exposed capability for inside of Analyzer. But let's just walk through performing that same type of trade study using ModelCenter, just so you can see the similarities. It's going to look very familiar. So I'm going to say start a new model, and as I mentioned, a lot of these modeling blocks can be linked together, so you can tie inputs and outputs from one tool to the next. Some of those can be set up like processes, simulation processes that have a very definitive starting point, and you can go through logic blocks and other things that will, based on inputs and outputs, maybe it branches off and takes another turn in an analysis landscape. I'm gonna select just data, my destination directory. I'm just gonna choose my trade studies folder here where I have my STK scenario, and I'm just gonna call this test. All right, so now to add a component, I just drag components into my architect window here, and I'm going to grab my STK block first. I'm just going to drop that in. It's asking me to map the scenario file for this, and I know that I have a scenario file in that top level folder that we were just looking at in STK, so I'm going to choose to open that one. What you'll notice is that in the background, STK actually opens. And I know you don't see it on my machine, but STK is actually running in the background. I can pull up that same scenario. This will look very familiar because this is where we were starting from previously. I'm going to minimize that. It also brought up, let me adjust my windows here just a little bit. It brought up this same analyzer screen. This is the same one that we saw inside of STK. This just is sort of the interface builder for grabbing all of my input variables and my output data provider variables for the scenario that I have loaded. And you'll see my STK block in the designer window. So I'm going to go through that same that same setup. I'm going to go to my centroid object. Inside of position, I had identified things like latitude and longitude, so I can bring those over. I had a figure of merit, my EB over N naught. That was my continental US coverage results. I'm going to go to the overall value. I was interested in just sort of the average, so I can bring that over. And this is really kind of the general workflow, right? It's just identifying inputs and outputs and things that your STK scenario may be computing or calculating, and you want to have access to those so that you can do more complex or complicated trade studies or share those parameter or properties with maybe some other tool. It really starts to become pretty endless in what you can do here, and I don't have to worry about performing any sort of scripting or coding. All right, so I've set up that analyzer workflow very similar to what I had previously. Expand my model window, and you'll see that I have the only thing I have in my designer here is the STK block, but it's now exposing all of those inputs and outputs, the same ones that I had designed and created and linked previously. I haven't calculated anything yet. It's pulling what my current or previous STK scenario had for my latitude and longitude values, and if I'm interested in that average EB over N naught, you can see there's a red X indicating this hasn't yet been computed. I find this very easy to use because I can click it and ask for a direct linked computation. And what it's doing behind the scenes, again, is just loading that STK scenario, and it's performing the necessary calculations, and it's going to return that result back here to me in the resulting value. So you can imagine this is very much setting the stage for an automated trade study, just like I performed inside of STK Analyzer interface previously. So it's performing all of my coverage calculations that I needed, and it's populating the resulting value here. And give it just a second to finish that computation. All right, so that's great. I don't have much more that I want to do with this, but I could take it to a next step, just like I did natively inside of STK, by setting up a trade study like a carpet plot. I can, again, just bring over my latitude or my longitude. I can give it, very similar value ranges, 33, maybe I'll just go to 35, maybe just 3 steps there. Pick a few values, 90, and then my responses. Right, so this is my analyzer, very familiar interface that you saw in STK Analyzer. This is just the native carpet plot tool inside of ModelCenter. So if you're a previous analyzer user, you're used to that workflow, that interface, that process, this is going to perform the exact same way, right? I can set that up and I can click run, and it's going to go out and perform each one of those iterative trade study events within my design space. I've already computed a good number of these previously, like we were analyzing and looking at. So just in the interest of time, I may not allow this to run through to completion, but I will let a couple of these calculate. Okay, so I think you probably get the picture. I'm going to go ahead and just halt my calculations here and close this out. If I let this run, just like we looked at in STK, this creates an entire trade study. I can look at my different analyses views like carpet plots and contour plots. I'll bring that back up in just a moment, just as a reminder. So here's that previous trade study that I did with 100+ different runs, and of course in a very similar way I can go in and look at the 3D scatter plot results as kind of one tool that allows me to analyze some of the results. Some of the carpet plots or contour plots, these are all just general out of the box analyses that I can look at and sort of explore. Now, I mentioned the ability to bring in other additional blocks into my Solution Explorer here in my design space. One of those, I'm just as an example, what I'm going to pull in is just an Excel block. I have a really specific and simple Excel sheet that I'm gonna show you really quick. This is an Excel sheet, book 1. It literally just has a value for latitude, a value for a longitude, and some other metric in here like cost analyses. This could be very formula based, and Excel is doing its Excel thing and providing some calculations for me. But just as a really simple example, I'm going to show how you would perform this. These are very simple to do, right? You point to your Excel sheet. One of the handy features, which I did not take advantage of, is if you have cells in your Excel sheet that are named the same as perhaps variables in some of the other blocks that you have in your design space, it will automatically suggest association of those variables, but I actually named them slightly different. So, which is kind of nice because now I can go in here and I can show you how to set up some of these inputs. So here I'm going to create an input variable in Excel. I'm just going to call it latitude, and I'll say, you know what, I want to pick my variable here, and perhaps it's coming from that. Here I'm gonna do longitude, and again similarly I'm gonna say pick longitude, and you know what, I'll just leave those there, and I'll click apply. And this ends up showing me latitude and longitude values for Excel. Now ideally what I'd like to do is link latitude and longitude. Maybe I've got values in my Excel sheet, right, 32 or 87. I can read them from my Excel sheet or type them in directly here, whatever I'd like to do. But if I wanted to connect those to my STK scenario, I actually just sort of hover over and leave my mouse still. My icon turns into a little linked chain, and that becomes a link editor. I can drag that over and just drop it, and it brings up the link editor window. And let me expand out my position values, and you can see my Excel latitude and longitude values here. So I can just grab that and drop it here, and that associates or links latitude and longitude values. All right, so this becomes very easy for me to set up these links, right? I can just click OK. This is very easy and simple to do. Now, you'll notice that all of my STK models now have red X's. It's just indicating that it needs to be updated, right? So I can correct these, update those, and even ask it to recalculate coverage based on these new values, right? And you'll see that that value has already returned back. 29.826 was my average overall EB over N naught based on what I had in my Excel model, right? So yeah, these are really handy, and kind of opens up some more possibilities and ways for you to explore tying STK and some of the entities and models inside of your STK scenario to perhaps potentially other tools, more advanced tools. You could have some very complex MATLAB scripts. Again, you could have your own analyses, sort of a black box approach where you use their the quick wrap script to just in a very similar workflow as you saw with Excel. Just identifying inputs and outputs, and perhaps your DLL itself just exposes, just like a typical API, some inputs and some outputs, just becomes a sort of a black box function for you. So yeah, these are just kind of general overview of approaching those same very similar trade study tools and that approach that you maybe are used to on the STK side using the legacy analyzer tool. But rest assured, all that same functionality and feature is still available and always has been inside of ModelCenter. Plus some of these additional integration capabilities that you could take advantage of if you wanted to. All right, so I hope that was helpful. Thanks.